Let's go to Melbourne now and catch up with National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie. Good to talk to you, Bridget. I want to start off on this misinformation bill. It's pleasing news for the whole country that the coalition has decided to oppose it. But what chance do you give yourself of being able to actually knock it off in the Senate?
Well, great to be with you, Chris, and I thought your opening remarks were dead on. We live in a free society because the foundation is freedom of thought and articulating those thoughts and ideas through freedom of speech, and having the government somehow deciding what's acceptable thoughts, what's acceptable to articulate and what's not, I think is incredibly damaging and undermining for a free society. So we're absolutely voting against this in the Senate. We're hoping that senators, particularly on the crossbench, will see the sense in that and will want to protect free speech and holding, not making bureaucrats in charge of articulating what is politically sensitive, I think is the actual word in the legislation. If we were going to get if we're going to sort of drum up issues around what's politically sensitive and not, you wouldn't be able to stand up for Israel in this day and age at the rate we're going, let alone speak out against renewables. You'd be off air. Exactly,
yeah, it would be off air. Now, look, let's be realistic about this. There are issues and concerns about social media and the digital media and deep fake news and all that. We recognise that, and the coalition in government looked at maybe some sort of legislation to control this. But I'm pleased you've come to this position now of outright opposition, because it is such a bad idea to go down this particular path. But the trouble is, if Labor with the Greens get it through the Senate, even if you were to win government, the chances of having the numbers in the Senate to repeal it would be problematic. I just think once in, it's such a risk for this country. We need to hear so much more about this. This is a sort of a to the barricades moment for Australian democracy.
Yeah. I agree, Chris, and I think it's really putting in forefront of people's minds the abhorrent legislation that this government is putting in its first term. The number of things that we're going to have to try to repeal is growing. And you're right, we can't do that without a Senate that actually understands the challenges and what Australians actually want to see. And so I think you're going to see, hopefully, more and more Australians paying more attention to the long white paper at the ballot box and not just the short green one when they're thinking about who and how they want the Australian government to work, because we have seen over the last few years a growing tendency of the Senate to have a mind of its own, to not be willing to support the government of the day. There are some significant pieces of legislation that will need to be repealed if we're going to get this country back on track, and that means Australians thinking seriously about the type of senators they send to Canberra. Well,
talking about the electoral prospects, of course, a big day for the coalition today, finally getting ahead of Labor on the two-party preferred basis, 51-49. That wouldn't be enough to win new government, certainly push them into minority government. But it's embarrassing for Albanese. He's been boasting about never losing a Newspoll. Well, now he's lost one. Late today in Brisbane, he reacted to the news. Here's the Prime Minister.
I'm very focused on continuing to lead a majority government. My government has a record that we're very proud of, a record that's cut inflation in half whilst creating almost 1 million jobs.
Gee, I don't know about that. I don't know whether that would pass the misinformation bill test to say that he's proud of his government's record. I mean, it's not much of a record, but do you think this is a problem he set for himself, boasting about not losing a Newspoll?
Look, I think it's one of the rarest of all leadership characteristics displayed by Prime Ministers of recent past, and that is humility. You find it in spades in Peter Dutton. You find strength and humility with Peter Dutton, but, I think it's always important for those people in leadership to be humble, and I don't think one Newspoll a government makes, you're right. I think what Newspoll did show today is that Australians are trying to send a very clear message to the government that they are struggling with their mortgages, with their bills, with their groceries, with the cost of living pressures, and this government has not been able to respond. It has no plan. And that's actually the message that's been sent to Anthony Albanese and his team. They're screaming out for relief and a response. And so far, this PM's come up with nothing. So there's a ways to go, but right now, not looking good.
Thanks for joining us, Senator. I appreciate it. Senator Bridget McKenzie there, the Nationals leader in the Senate.